It's one of the valuable investigative tools is to follow the money.
Okay. Have Jeffrey Epstein's victims have asked us to ask you whether or not you've investigated Epstein's lawyers, the lawyers who facilitated those payments. Have you subpoenaed or questioned any of those lawyers?
So in 2018 and 19, what I recollect is many, if not every one of those lawyers was part of the investigation.
But you weren't there at that time, right?
I wasn't there.
Okay. So can you get us the names and the numbers of who was investigated then with respect to those lawyers?
As long as I'm allowed to release it, absolutely.
Okay. Well, if we provide you with subpoenas, I assume you can release it. Is that right?
We have a current subpoena, and we're working with Congress to provide it.
Okay. You've said that the Acosta investigation had an original sin. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Basically, if you're looking at an actual pedophile ring, what you should not do is limit the time frame in which you're legally able to collect information. So search warrants that Mr. Acosta utilized in 2006 and 7 leading to the 2008 plea agreement had a very specific narrow window of years, I think 3 or 4 years. And so information pursuant to legal process wasn't collected for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. It also, subpoenas were not sent out to hundreds of witnesses at the time, hundreds of victims at the time. None of that was done. None of these people were put in grand juries. And so the totality of information from the jump, instead of being this big, was like this. And that, in my opinion, is not how you run an investigation if you're trying to break a sex trafficking ring.
Good evening and welcome to this special report. I'm your host, and tonight we are clearing the schedule to bring you a comprehensive breakdown of what can only be described as a watershed moment in American legislative history. For the past several hours, the House Judiciary Committee has been the site of a ferocious political battle. At the center of the storm is FBI Director Kash Patel. In a marathon testimony that swung wildly between technical legal defense and heated personal attacks, Director Patel faced a barrage of questions that touched on the darkest and most divisive nerves in the American body politic. We are talking about the hidden files of Jeffrey Epstein. We are talking about the assassination of conservative icon Charlie Kirk. We are talking about allegations of a deep state purge, secret burn bags, and a fundamental reshaping of federal law enforcement. Tonight, we aren't just giving you the sound bites. We are going through the record line by line to understand what we just witnessed. Let's begin with the subject that sucked the oxygen out of the room from the very first gavel, the Jeffrey Epstein files. For years, the phrase Epstein client list has been a political football. Before he was director, Kash Patel was one of the loudest voices demanding its release. He famously told interviewers that the so-called Black Book was under the direct control of the FBI and challenged the government to put on its big boy pants and release the names. Today, lawmakers called him on that bluff. The questioning was led aggressively by Democrats, specifically Representative Goldman and Representative Crockett, who accused the director of participating in a cover-up to protect powerful allies, most notably President Donald Trump. They demanded to know why, after 7 months in office, the full list of Epstein's co-conspirators hasn't been made public. Director Patel's defense was technical but critical to understanding the government's stance. He referred to what he calls the original sin of the Epstein saga. He testified that the original investigation, conducted between 2006 and 2008 under then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta, was fatally flawed. He argued that the search warrants executed back then were incredibly narrow, limited to a specific window of 3 or 4 years. Patel told the committee, quote, "I simply am not able to go back 20 years and collect information that the courts had decided was already subject to search warrants." He essentially argued that his hands are tied by the legal failures of the past. He stated that the FBI has released everything legally allowable. But here is where the friction intensified. When pushed on why he won't release the thousands of photos and videos seized from Epstein's properties, Patel was blunt. He claimed the overwhelming majority of that material is downloaded pornography and evidence depicting the sexual abuse of minors. Material, he said, that the FBI will never release to the public. But the committee wasn't satisfied with that answer. They pivoted to the money. In a stunning revelation during the hearing, it was brought to light that 4 major banks, J.P. Morgan, Bank of New York Mellon, Bank of America, and Deutsche Bank, have flagged over $1.5 billion in Tyrell Samkansals in suspicious transaction reports connected to the Epstein network. Lawmakers demanded subpoenas for the CEOs of these banks, arguing that if the documents are sealed, the money trail is the only way to expose the truth. Director Patel confirmed the FBI is reviewing financial data, but deflected specific questions to the Treasury Department. And then the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. Representative after representative pressed Patel on whether the president's name appears in the unredacted files. They asked if he had briefed the attorney general or the president himself on the contents. Patel navigated this minefield carefully. He refused to give a specific number of times the name appears, dismissing the question as political innuendo. However, he stated largely and unequivocally that based on the entirety of the evidence the FBI possesses, the president is not implicated in any crimes. This did little to quell the accusations from the left, who argued that Patel's refusal to provide a straight yes or no regarding his communications with the White House suggests a conflict of interest. While the Epstein debate looked to the past, the hearing also addressed a fresh and raw tragedy, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. The transcript reveals a nation on edge. The killing of Mr. Kirk on September 10th served as a grim backdrop for a heated debate on political violence. Director Patel used the investigation into this murder as a proof of concept for his new FBI. He touted the speed of the Bureau's response. He detailed how he personally walked the crime scene in Utah and made the executive decision to release photos and video of the suspect immediately, a break from traditional protocol. Because of that decision, Patel testified, the suspect was in custody within 33 hours. He revealed that it was the suspect's own parents who identified him from the FBI's release and confronted him, leading to his capture. But the unity over solving the crime quickly evaporated. The hearing devolved into a bitter argument over who is to blame for the rising temperature in America. Republicans painted a picture of a radical left whipped into a violent frenzy. They cited rhetoric from Democratic leaders calling opponents existential threats and Nazis, arguing that this language dehumanizes conservatives and invites violence. One member read a haunting post written by Charlie Kirk just months before his death, where he warned that assassination culture is spreading. Democrats pushed back with equal force. They cited statistics from the Anti-Defamation League and the Cato Institute, arguing that historically, right-wing extremism remains the largest domestic terror threat. They brought up the name of Melissa Hortman, the Minnesota House Speaker and a Democrat who was assassinated in her home by a right-wing extremist just months prior. They accused Director Patel of a double standard, of tweeting dozens of times about Charlie Kirk while remaining relatively silent on violence against Democrats. When asked point blank if he agreed with President Trump's assessment that the left is the problem, Patel attempted to walk a fine line. He acknowledged that there is too much political violence on both sides, and he notably confirmed that the FBI is investigating a dangerous new online network known as 764. A nihilistic group that targets children and encourages self-harm and violence, proving that the threat is morphing beyond traditional politics. Now let's move to the internal war at the FBI. If you want to understand why this hearing was so explosive, you have to look at what is happening inside the Hoover building. Since taking over, Kash Patel has initiated a massive restructuring. He confirmed today that he has moved over 1,000 personnel out of the Washington, D.C. headquarters and into field offices across the country. His mantra, repeated several times today, is simply, let good cops be cops. To his supporters, this is a long overdue draining of the swamp. Republicans lauded him for gutting the D.C. bureaucracy, which they view as bloated and politicized. They entered documents into the record regarding a previously obscure investigation called Operation Arctic Frost. According to the testimony, this was an investigation launched under the previous administration that allegedly targeted 92 Republican groups, including the RNC and Turning Point USA, under the guise of election security. Patel did not shy away from these allegations. In fact, he threw fuel on the fire. He confirmed the release of the Durham Annex, a classified document that he declassified. He testified that this document proves the FBI was weaponized against the Trump campaign in 2016, based on false intelligence provided by political opponents. In perhaps the most cinematic moment of the hearing, Patel described finding critical evidence in burn bags, bags literally meant for the incineration of classified documents that had been left behind by his predecessors. The implication was clear. The previous leadership tried to destroy evidence of their own misconduct. But to the Democrats, this isn't a cleanup. It's a purge. They cited a lawsuit filed by former career agents, including a former acting director and decorated combat veterans, who alleged they were fired simply for working on cases the president didn't like. They accuse Patel of conducting loyalty tests, asking agents who they voted for in past elections. One representative read from Patel's own book, Government Gangsters, listing the names of officials Patel had labeled as enemies of the state, and asked if he could truly be impartial in investigating them. Patel's response was defiant. He denied asking about voting history but stood by his decisions, stating that anyone fired was terminated for failing to meet the mission, not for their politics. Finally, we must look at the numbers. Amidst all the political theater, Director Patel came armed with a dossier of statistics to defend his 7 months in office. And the numbers he presented are staggering. He claims that under his watch, the United States is on track for the lowest murder rate in modern recorded history. Let that sink in. The lowest in modern history. He reported 3,000 violent felony arrests in just 7 months, double the rate of the previous year. He touted the seizure of 89,000 kilograms of cocaine and 7,300 kilograms of meth. He highlighted Operation Summer Heat, a targeted surge of federal resources into violent cities. He credited this operation for a 60% drop in gun crime and a 53% drop in homicides right here in Washington, D.C., a city that had been plagued by spiraling violence. On the border, he offered a mixed report. He testified that terrorist entries at the southern border have dropped to near zero due to strict enforcement. However, he raised a new, urgent alarm about the Cantimino Mater, northern border. He cited a sharp increase in known or suspected terrorists trying to enter the U.S. from Canada, signaling a shift in national security focus. He also addressed the fentanyl crisis with a new diplomatic angle. He explicitly linked the drug supply to Chinese precursor chemicals and detailed new FBI efforts to engage directly with Chinese authorities to ban these substances, a diplomatic channel he claims the Bureau had neglected for a decade. Critics on the committee argued that crime was already trending down before he took office, suggesting he is taking credit for the work of others. But Patel insisted that the sharp acceleration in arrests is due to his decision to stop investigating parents at school boards and Catholics in churches and instead surge resources back to the streets. So where does this leave us? Today's hearing was a window into a fractured America, but also a rapidly changing FBI. Under Director Kash Patel, the Bureau is undeniably aggressive. It is aggressive in declassifying its own past secrets. It is aggressive in moving agents out of the seat of power in Washington. And it is aggressive in its public defense of a new hardline mandate. For his supporters, Patel is the thin blue line finally restored, a leader who is ignoring political noise to crush violent crime and expose the deep state corruption of the past. For his detractors, he remains a dangerous loyalist, a man accused of protecting his boss while dismantling the institutional guardrails that keep federal law enforcement independent. One thing is certain, the FBI of today looks very different than it did just 1 year ago. And with investigations into the Epstein money trail and the political assassinations still ongoing, we have likely not heard the last from Director Patel. Thank you for joining us for this special comprehensive report. We will continue to follow the evidence, the money, and the testimony as it develops. Good night.